On a freezing Denver night, a scarred German shepherd stumbled out of the shadows. His breath curled in the cold air, his body thin, his neck marked by the cruel bite of a chain. But this dog wasn't lost to strangers. He had been hidden beneath the very home that was supposed to protect him. For Ethan Ward, a former U.S. Marine, Shadow was more than a dog. He was a brother in arms, a silent guardian who had carried Ethan through the darkest nights after war. When a chilling phone call demanded millions for the shepherd's life, Ethan realized the betrayal was closer than he ever imagined. Shadow wasn't just missing, he had been locked away, drugged, and used as a weapon in a twisted plan fueled by vengeance that no one believed the German shepherd could survive. No one imagined he would still rise, broken but loyal, to protect the man who had never stopped believing in him. This is the story of a Marine, a shepherd, and a secret buried in a basement, a story of betrayal, survival, and a loyalty stronger than hate. Subscribe to Shepherd Legacy for more true stories of courage and devotion. Tell us in the comments, which city are you watching from today? The night had been quiet in Ethan Ward's modest Denver home. A half-empty coffee cup sat cooling on the table, paperwork spread across the kitchen counter, the television humming faintly in the background. Since leaving the Marines, Ethan had learned to live with silence, though it never quite felt like peace. Only one sound made the nights bearable, the steady breathing of his German shepherd, Shadow, lying faithfully at his feet. Shadow had been more than a pet. He was Ethan's anchor, the one who stood guard when memories of war threatened to pull him under. Through restless nights, Shadow stayed beside him. On long, empty days, he was the presence that reminded Ethan he wasn't alone. Their bond had been forged not in comfort, but in survival. That's why, when the phone rang that night and a distorted voice hissed through the line, Ethan's world shifted. "You want to see your dog again?" "You'll do exactly as I say." Ethan froze, his hand tightening on the receiver. "Who is this? Where's Shadow?" A low laugh crackled back. "He's alive for now. But if you ever want him back, you'll pay." The call ended abruptly, leaving only the faint buzz of the dead line. Ethan's heart pounded. He rushed into the living room, calling Shadow's name. Silence answered. The blanket he had laid out was empty, his companion gone without a trace. Panic clawed at him. Shadow wasn't the kind of dog to wander off. His loyalty was unshakable. The idea of him vanishing into the night didn't make sense, which meant someone had taken him. Someone had been watching. Ethan tore through the house, checking doors, windows, locks. Nothing was broken. Nothing forced. Whoever had taken Shadow hadn't needed to break in. They had known how to get close. That thought sent a chill deeper than the winter air. He grabbed his jacket and stormed outside. The snow crunched beneath his boots, his breath sharp in the cold. "Shadow!" He shouted into the darkness, but only silence answered back. Back inside, Ethan sat at the table, head in his hands, the weight of dread pressing down. The Marine in him wanted to fight, to hunt down whoever had dared take his partner. But beneath that fury was something heavier, fear. Shadow wasn't just missing. He was in danger, and the voice on the phone had made one thing very clear: this was no random act. This was personal. Ethan swore under his breath, fists tightening. "Whoever you are, you'll regret this." Somewhere in the cold dark of the city, Shadow waited, chained, hidden, and hurting. And Ethan knew he would burn the world to bring him home. The night after the call, Ethan didn't sleep. He sat at the table, staring at Shadow's empty blanket, every muscle in his body coiled with tension. His instincts screamed at him someone had taken his partner, and if Ethan didn't act fast, the shepherd might not survive. By dawn, he was already on the move. The snow still clung to the streets of Denver, crunching under his truck tires as he retraced the neighborhood. He asked neighbors, shopkeepers, anyone awake at that early hour. Most shook their heads, but one old man pointed toward a side street. "Heard barking late last night," he muttered. Didn't sound right. Like the dog was scared. Ethan's jaw tightened. Shadow didn't scare easily. He followed the lead, and as he turned the corner, his stomach sank. In the snow lay fresh tracks, boot prints and paw prints, tangled together. He knelt, brushing snow away with gloved fingers. The paw prints were Shadow's. Ethan knew them like his own scars. But the stride was uneven, dragging, as if his dog had been pulled against his will. Rising, Ethan scanned the empty street. Every shadow felt like an enemy, every sound a threat. Whoever had done this wasn't careless. They had planned, stalked, and taken Shadow right from under his nose. Later that afternoon, Ethan walked into the precinct. His old friend, Detective Harris, raised a brow as Ethan stormed in. "You look like hell," Harris muttered. "They took him," Ethan said flatly. "Shadow, someone has him." Harris frowned, leaning back in his chair. "Ethan, it's been years since you left the service." "You're sure this isn't?" "I got a call," Ethan cut in. "A ransom." "They want money." And Harris, they knew him. They knew Shadow was mine. The detective's skepticism faded. "You think it's connected to your past?" Ethan nodded slowly. "It has to be. Whoever took him isn't after cash, they're after me." Harris sighed, rubbing his temples. "I'll put a trace on your line. But Ethan, if this is as personal as you say, you're in dangerous territory." That night, the phone rang again. The same distorted voice slithered through the line. "You have 48 hours. If you don't pay, the dog dies." Ethan gritted his teeth. "If you hurt him, I'll find you. And when I do," the caller chuckled darkly and hung up. Ethan slammed the phone down, his pulse roaring in his ears. He knew this wasn't just about money. This was revenge. Someone had crawled out of the past to hurt him the only way they could, through Shadow. Standing by the window, Ethan whispered into the snowy night, "Hold on, boy. I'm coming." And with that vow, the hunt truly began. The snow kept falling, covering Denver in a heavy white silence. But inside Ethan's chest, there was no calm, only fire. Every instinct, honed from years in combat, told him the enemy wasn't far. And this time, the battlefield wasn't overseas. It was here, at home. Detective Harris managed to trace fragments of the ransom call. The signal bounced off burners, relays, and hidden servers. But one thing stood out: the origin was local. The kidnapper wasn't a stranger calling from across the country. He was close, too close. Ethan spent the next day chasing shadows. He walked streets he hadn't set foot on in years, asking questions in places most decent people avoided. At a rundown bar on the edge of town, he finally caught a break. A man at the counter lowered his voice as Ethan pressed him. "Yeah, I seen your dog," the man muttered nervously. "Couple of guys brought him through last week. Said they had a score to settle." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Who?" The man shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting. "Name I heard was Mason. That mean something to you?" It did. The name hit Ethan like a punch. Mason Clark, once his brother in arms. A Marine who had served alongside him, fought beside him. But Mason hadn't left the battlefield with honor. He had left with bitterness, court-martialed after a mission went wrong. A mission Ethan had commanded, and now Ethan realized Mason had found a way to make him pay. That night, as the city slept under its blanket of snow, Ethan sat in his truck outside a crumbling warehouse on the outskirts. Harris's men had picked up chatter pointing here. The windows were dark, the air thick with silence, but Ethan could feel it. Shadow was inside. He slipped closer, every step measured, his body moving with the old discipline of a soldier. Near a basement window, a faint whimper broke the silence. His chest clenched. "Shadow." He crouched low, peering through the crack. The sight inside made his stomach twist. Shadow was chained to a beam, his once strong frame trembling. His fur was patchy, eyes glazed from whatever drugs they had pumped into him. But when his ears flicked at Ethan's whisper, Shadow hope flickered in his gaze. Before Ethan could act, a shadow moved behind him. Cold steel pressed against his temple. A familiar voice spoke, low and venomous. "Long time, brother." Ethan froze. Mason stepped into view, his face hardened by years of hate, eyes burning with resentment. "You took everything from me," Mason hissed. "And now I'll take everything from you." Starting with him, the gun dug deeper into Ethan's skin. Shadow growled weakly from inside the basement, chains rattling as he struggled. Ethan's pulse thundered. He knew one thing for certain. The war he thought he had left behind had just come home. The cold steel of the pistol dug into Ethan's temple as Mason shoved him toward the basement door. Snow crunched under their boots, the world around them silent except for Shadow's faint growl echoing from below. "Move," Mason ordered. His voice was calm, but there was venom under every word. Ethan's fists clenched. "This is what you've become? Chaining a dog, my dog?" Mason laughed bitterly. "Your dog? He should have been mine. Everything should have been mine. But you," he jabbed Ethan in the ribs with the barrel, "you ruined that the day you left me behind." The memories flooded back. A mission gone wrong, chaos in the desert, a choice made in seconds. Ethan had pulled his men out, leaving Mason wounded and bitter. Though he had lived, his career had died, court-martialed, dishonored, and Ethan had carried that weight ever since. Inside the basement, the air was damp and suffocating. A single bulb swung overhead, casting long shadows on the walls. Shadow was chained to a support beam, his body weak, muzzle crusted with dried blood. At the sight of Ethan, his ears perked, a faint whine escaping his throat. Ethan's chest tightened. "Shadow." Mason shoved him forward. "Touch him and you die where you stand." But Ethan met Mason's glare head-on. "You think killing me will fix what happened? You think torturing an animal makes you a soldier again? You're still the coward who left men behind." Mason's face twisted with rage. He swung the gun like a hammer, striking Ethan across the jaw. Pain exploded, and Ethan staggered, tasting blood. Shadow's growl deepened, his chains rattling violently as he fought to stand. Even weak, even broken, he was ready to fight for Ethan. "Look at him," Mason sneered. "Still loyal, pathetic. He doesn't even know you failed him too." Ethan spat blood onto the concrete, his eyes narrowing. "The only failure here is you, Mason." The air crackled with silence. For a moment, Mason's hand trembled on the gun. Old memories flickered, brotherhood, laughter, shared battles. But just as quickly, the hatred returned, hardening his eyes. He pulled back the hammer. Shadow barked, the sound raw and desperate, echoing through the basement. The shepherd lunged against his chains, every muscle straining. The beam creaked, wood splintering under the force. Ethan seized the distraction. With a soldier's instinct, he drove his elbow into Mason's wrist, twisting hard. The gun clattered to the floor. They crashed into each other, fists flying. Old comrades now locked in a savage fight. Shadow barked again, teeth bared, pulling until the chain links groaned. He wasn't going to let Ethan fight alone. Not again. For Ethan, the war had never really ended. But this battle, this one was personal. The basement echoed with the brutal sounds of fists connecting, bodies slamming against concrete walls. Ethan fought like a man possessed, every punch fueled by years of guilt, betrayal, and the desperate need to save his partner. Mason struck back just as hard, rage giving him strength. His eyes wild with hatred. Shadow's growls filled the room, sharp and urgent. He lunged again and again against the chain that held him, paws scraping raw against the concrete floor. His amber eyes locked on Ethan, his human, his partner struggling against the enemy. The beam groaned under the strain, splinters snapping free. Mason grabbed a jagged pipe from the floor and swung it. Ethan ducked just in time, the metal slamming into the wall, sparks flying. Seizing the moment, Ethan drove his shoulder into Mason's chest, knocking him back. The gun still lay on the floor, inches away. Both men lunged for it. Shadow's bark split the air like thunder. With a final savage pull, the chain snapped from the beam. The shepherd stumbled forward, weak but unstoppable, his paws slipping on the floor as he hurled himself into the fight. Mason's hand closed around the gun just as Shadow crashed into him. Teeth clamped down on Mason's arm, the weapon firing with a deafening crack, the bullets shattering the light overhead. The basement plunged into chaos, sparks and dust raining down. Shadow! Ethan shouted, his voice raw, despite his battered body. Shadow held firm, growling deep, refusing to let go even as Mason screamed in fury. Ethan leapt forward, kicking the gun from Mason's hand and wrenching him to the ground. The two grappled violently, Ethan's fists hammering down with years of pent-up rage. Mason snarled through the blood on his lips. "He'll never survive without me." But Ethan's answer came not with words, but with Shadow's growl low, steady, unbroken. The shepherd stood over them, chest heaving, fur bristling, amber eyes blazing with the same fire Ethan remembered from the battlefield. Despite the pain, despite the torture, Shadow was still a warrior. The sight of him gave Ethan the strength he needed. With one final punch, Mason went limp, collapsing against the floor. The fight was over. Ethan collapsed beside Shadow, chest heaving. He reached out, resting a trembling hand on the shepherd's neck. "You held on. You held on for me." Shadow's tail thumped weakly against the concrete, a fragile sound of victory. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Harris's men were closing in. But for Ethan, the world had narrowed to just this, his partner, alive, battered but unbroken, lying beside him. In that moment, nothing else mattered. By the time Detective Harris and his team stormed the warehouse, Ethan was already kneeling beside Shadow, one arm wrapped tightly around the shepherd's battered body. Mason lay unconscious on the floor, handcuffed swiftly by the arriving officers. The fight was over, but the war for Shadow's life had only begun. "Get a medic!" Ethan roared, his voice cracking with urgency. Shadow's breaths were shallow, his fur sticky with blood and dirt, but his amber eyes never left Ethan's face. That look, faithful, unshakable, told Ethan all he needed to know. His partner wasn't giving up. The ride to the emergency vet clinic blurred into flashes of sirens, snow whipping against the windows, Ethan's hand never leaving Shadow's paw. "Stay with me, boy," he whispered again and again, as if words alone could anchor Shadow to life. Inside the clinic, bright lights and frantic voices surrounded them. Vets and techs rushed Shadow onto a table, attaching IVs, checking wounds, working with practiced speed. Ethan stood just feet away, fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. Marines were trained to handle chaos, but this, watching his partner fight for life, was almost unbearable. Hours crawled by. Every tick of the clock felt like a blade twisting deeper. Ethan paced the waiting room, Harris by his side. "He's strong," Harris said quietly. "Stronger than most men I know." Ethan didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the door, waiting for anyone to tell him his dog would live. Finally, as dawn broke and pale light spilled through frosted windows, a vet stepped out. "He's stable," she said, exhaustion softening her voice. "It'll be a long recovery, but he made it." Ethan exhaled for the first time in hours, his shoulders sagging. Relief burned behind his eyes, and he didn't fight the tears this time. When he finally stepped into the recovery room, Shadow was curled on a blanket, 4 still in place, chest rising and falling steadily. At the sound of Ethan's boots, the shepherd's ears flicked. His amber eyes opened, and with a faint wag of his tail, he greeted his Marine. Ethan dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead gently against Shadow's. "You came back to me," he whispered. His voice cracked. "They couldn't break you. They'll never break us." For a long time, man and dog simply stayed there, warriors who had carried each other through pain, betrayal, and near death. Weeks later, snow still blanketed Denver, but inside Ethan's home, warmth had returned. Shadow rested by the fireplace, scars visible but spirit unbroken. Every so often, his gaze would meet Ethan's, and something unspoken passed between them. Not just loyalty. Not just survival. It was the kind of bond forged only in fire, the kind that even betrayal, chains, and hate could never destroy. And as Ethan whispered into the quiet night, Shadow's ears perked, tail thumping softly. "Homeboy, you're home."